So I decided to go all fancy for this. So this was a request to talk about how do I pick somebody for a character profile? What do I look for? What makes someone, in my view at least, a good character? So I have three criteria that I use, or rather, I reflected on how I choose people, and this is the criteria I picked out. I think the first thing that kind of matters or what comes to mind when you're looking at a character is whether or not they're relatable to you. Does that character go through the same kind of challenges and dilemmas that you face in your life? Like if we look at a couple, just off the top of my head, we have Neo from The Matrix. When we first meet him, he's working a crappy office job. He's kind of going nowhere in life. He's kind of a loser. He's looking for excitement and adventure. That's something I think a lot of us can relate to. Kind of in a similar vein, Wesley from Wanted is also kind of an example of that whole wish fulfillment thing. Then we get into kind of some other characters a bit more abstract. One of my all-time favorite characters is Nagato, or Pain from Naruto, and I'm going to be talking about him probably a couple times. But his whole thing is the difficulty of life. It's an attempt to kind of deal with the suffering of existence in this world. And then you have maybe a character like, I'm just trying to think of some others, Jon Snow. People like Jon Snow, I think, to a large extent because they see a lot of themselves in him. You got a kind of an awkward kid who's kind of alienated from, he's a bit different, he's a bit out of place, which is, I think, something a lot of people feel, and he goes off to try to make a name for himself. And it's kind of the coming of age thing. It's becoming a man. And once again, that's something I think a lot of people can relate to. And what they'll often do to characters is they'll add a humanizing figure of trait of sorts. Like with Kaji, he has his watermelons. You might have the character have a dog, or a hobby that's pretty kind of banal, or just kind of something a bit different. Maybe they like to garden, that sort of thing. And that's a good way to kind of humanize the character and make them relatable, because they might be some like weird space alien or something, but they like flowers or something to that effect, and that just makes it a lot easier for you to kind of relate to them and to kind of build a bridge of sorts. So I think relatability is kind of the first thing you go with. Thinking about some other characters who are relatable, I think why Walter White and Jesse took off so much and why Breaking Bad's such a great show is because the characters that Vince Gilligan makes, or is it Vince Gilligan? Whatever Vince Gilligan makes, are just very realistic. Walter White, I think, and I've said this about him, he kind of summarizes the struggle of kind of the modern white male. He's kind of henpecked by his wife. He's working kind of a dead-end job to make. He can't make ends meet. The government isn't there for him. They aren't going to provide his health care. They'll provide it for illegal aliens, but not him. He had his inheritance, or whatever you want to call it, his company stolen from him by Elliot Schwartz, which is also something a lot of people can relate to. And he's just he's somebody who snaps. He's someone who just gets tired of his kind of crappy cookie cutter middle class life and decides to step out and try to find something extraordinary to take back control. And I think that's, like I said, that's something a lot of people relate to. And a lot of people kind of criticize the idea of wish fulfillment, but to a large extent, the reason wish fulfillment works is because the character's relatable. This is very common in a lot of animes like Shauna. I'm trying to think of some others off the top of my head. Card Captors, Digimon, those kind of things in which you take normal people and you put them into a fantastical world. And a lot of the times people are drawn to these characters and interested in these characters because you can kind of relate to them. Just a couple others I've thought about. You have Luke Skywalker. Once again, you're in a world where everybody's kind of a space alien. You have this strange place. You have aliens, you have robots, you have the Empire, and you have this guy who grew up on a farm, which is, even if you didn't grow up a farm, you're used to the concept. It's not something out of the ordinary. He's a man who wants to go off and make his way in life, but he feels he's kind of left behind. Just he kind of can't go out and make a name for himself. And Anakin's very similar. And that's something you can relate to. That's a kind of a story that is the story of us all, more or less. And once again, that's kind of like I said with Shauna, with a lot of just different animes, anything where they take, like I said, a normal person, draw them into fantastic world. That is relatability. I think if you can't relate to the character on some level, if you can't relate to their struggles, to their pain, etc., you're just not going to be able to connect with them. They're just not going to be somebody who is necessarily interesting. So the second trait I think that makes a good character is a balance of positive and negative traits. That is, there's good aspects to them and there's bad aspects to them. There's things that are sympathetic about them. There's things that are alienating about them. They have strengths, they have weaknesses, they have flaws, they have vices, they have virtues. And that is kind of what makes a character interesting. Kind of the conflict between different aspects of their personality. You can kind of see them straining against one another. Like, let's just go through some characters I've done. So we have Marjorie Tyrell, who, as I even say in the title, what's interesting about her is she does seem to have a compassionate and charitable side, but she also seems very cynical and manipulative. And you kind of have that. You have her kind of maybe being a thought, but also her being very intelligent. And you have a good mixture of positive and negative motivations, and sympathetic and alienating or contemptible traits. Tywin Lannister is a very good example of that. He's a man who, on one hand, is sadistic, brutal, power hungry, etc. On the other, he's generally considered to be just, even if he's harsh. He's generally considered to be just, to a certain extent, fair. He's a very skilled administrator, and he's not very corrupt. Like, I don't really get the impression that when he was the hand of the king, he stole money. He also has this just exudes kind of alpha manliness, etc. But at the same time, he's also excessive when it comes to that. So he's such an interesting character, and people like him so much, I think, because you have this interplay of different elements. Thrawn is also kind of an example of that. On one hand, he's very bad at social situations. He's very bad at playing politics and playing the Game of Thrones. He also is kind of in command of an empire that doesn't necessarily serve his motivations, but he's kind of a more moral person in a very immoral system. And kind of that conflict there is very important and useful. We also have, like, just looking here, Palpatine. Palpatine's another good example. Palpatine has a lot of very good traits about him. He's charismatic, he's intelligent, he's powerful, he's a man of vision. He has a lot of things that are good about him. And that's part of the reason also why the devil is such a compelling figure, because there's a lot of good things about the devil. Like I said, he's charismatic, he's intelligent, he's powerful, he's wise in a certain sense. So, like, Palpatine has all these positive traits. He's also a complete sociopath, a sadistic nut, and utterly power hungry and ruthless. So you kind of have a mix there, and that's good. Shinji and Asuka are also a good example of not only kind of mixed characters, characters who have good mixes, and maybe I'll start going into some characters who have a mix of the first two traits. Why I think Asuka and Shinji are such good characters is, A, they're both sympathetic. I think we've all dealt with being socially awkward, being depressed, the troubles of growing up, the troubles of kind of finding your place in the world in dealing with people, and kind of the pain and suffering that comes with that. So I think they both kind of represent that. They also have a balance of kind of interesting positive and negative traits. Shinji is compassionate. He is good looking. He's very skilled at piloting an Eva. He is the Messiah, as I like to call him. On the other hand, he has very low self confidence. He can't see his own virtues. He has difficulty reaching out to people, and he has a general trouble interacting with the outside world. Asuka is beautiful, charismatic. She has a genius level intellect. She has all these other things, but she's an incredibly caustic and cruel person to the point of sadism. So you have sympathetic aspects to both characters and very contemptible aspects, but in a relatable way. Let's say Peter Rousseau. He's another example of both. He's kind of relatable in the sense that you knew a guy like him growing up. He kind of feels like maybe you would. Like you get into a situation like he's in, all the power goes to your head, and you start to become you let it corrupt you. So there's that aspect, and there is a part of him that genuinely does love his children, loves his girlfriend, and wants to do right by the people he grew up around. On the other hand, he is very self-indulgent. He's derelict in his duty, and he frequently doesn't live up to his obligations to his kids. So, like, that's kind of what makes him an interesting character. So, I think kind of the third aspect of that makes a really good character is whether or not they have a complete arc. That is, they start in one place, they end up in another, and the arc is logical. It makes sense. It kind of, they come full circle more or less. So let me just scroll down. Do I not have Nagato in this? Maybe I don't. Okay, but so let's look at some kind of characters from that aspect. I have to update this list. We have Jiraiya in Naruto, one of my favorite characters of all time. He's relatability is in his case is kind of something that unfurls over time. He's someone who just keeps trying. He failed to win the girl he loved. He kind of has his life is a mixture of failures and successes. He's arguably the most powerful ninja in the entire series, just with the amount of experience he has and the amount of jutsus he knows and stuff like that. On the other hand, he's a lecherous pervert. On the other hand, it does appear that he has loved Tsunade his entire life. But on the other hand, he's greedy, jealous. So he's kind of a very good mixture of sympathetic and bad character traits. On the other hand, what really makes him a good character, I think, is his death. Because when you see his death, they kind of bring everything full circle. Where he looks back on his life and he says that everything he's done has been a failure. He couldn't win the love of Tsunade. He couldn't save his friend. He couldn't save his student or his sensei. Basically, he's failed everybody in his life. And then you have the flashback where he wrote his book, The Tale of the Utterly Gutsy Shinobi, which is kind of semi-autobiographical, but is about basically somebody who keeps getting beaten down but never gives up. And the main character is named Naruto, and then Naruto is what his student names his son because of Jiraiya. And Naruto inherits his legacy. He inherits kind of Jiraiya's wishes. He inherits Minato's wishes. Jiraiya realizes that whatever his failures in his life, he did find the chosen one. He did find the child of prophecy, and he did train him. And that for all like his failures, Naruto did come to embody everything he thought a true shinobi should embody. So regardless of his failures in his life, he was at least able to leave that behind. And kind of his death is he comes to terms with his failures and his successes. And as he says, just barely honorable, but honorable indeed. Or just barely glorious, but glorious indeed. He's finally able to kind of come to the end of his character arc. And what makes it even better is he gets killed by a former student of his, the one who he thought was the chosen one, but it actually was Naruto. So you see him being killed by the false chosen one while he's realizing that the real chosen one he was able to prepare. So I think that makes him a compelling character. Gustavo Fring is another good character. He's not necessarily as sympathetic as some characters, but he is a very interesting mixture of positive and negative traits. On one hand, he's not needlessly cruel. He is very ruthless, but he doesn't take pleasure really in killing people. He would prefer for everything to be nice, organized, clean, neat, tidy, that sort of thing. And when it comes to him, he has a really good arc. He has this like 20-year long plan to get revenge on the Juarez cartel that's eventually carried out, and it's carried out in a very fashion. And it's, like I said, it's a cumulation of a very long term character arc. Also, kind of the thing with Jesse and Walt is Walt starts off as being a kind of the more upstanding, societally acceptable person, and Jesse starts out as being the drug dealing gangbanger. And over the course of the series, you have the two people move in opposite directions. You have Walter White become a worse and worse person and become more and more evil, and you have Jesse gradually rethinking his life. And ultimately, you have Jesse, who's kind of repented, managing to get away and survive, and Walt kind of dying for his sins. So I think that's a very, like I said, that's a good character arc. It shows that they've come full circle, and that's, like I said, that's what makes him so fascinating. Palpatine also kind of came full circle, where ultimately his arrogance, his drive, the things that allowed him to gain power were also the things that ultimately overthrew him. A certain degree of irony is very desirable when you're talking about a good character. Ultimately, their fate should be a reflection of the way they lived their lives. We also have Obi-Wan Kenobi, who once again, very good full circle. He, to a certain extent, wanted to become a knight so that he could train Anakin, and eventually you come all the way around and he's killed by his student. There we go. There's another good example. Let's kind of bring all this stuff together. Why do people like Lelouch so much? Because A, he is kind of sympathetic. He's the exiled prince. He's someone that deals with a lot of social awkwardness. I think to a certain extent he's completely unable to deal with his emotions, for both kind of good and bad. In some ways, he is logical, and that's a good thing. On the other hand, he's kind of an autist, I think is a decent way to put it. But ultimately, he has a very good character arc where he starts out just being completely obsessed with revenge, and then part of the way through, he starts to value people, and he kind of starts out on the pretense that he's just doing it for his sister, and ultimately he comes to realize he's doing it for the world's sake, and he's doing it for the sake of the people who trust him and believe in him. So you do have a very much a full circle, and he feels he has to pay through his sins with redemption equals death. Another good example of that is Darth Vader, where we have the scene where he goes, where he basically says, "You already have saved me, Luke. You already have saved me." And ultimately, he does kind of see the error of his ways and repents and is able to die. Once again, Vader's a great example. Anakin's relatable. His descent into darkness is also very relatable. We also have, in addition to that, there is a... Sorry, I just lost my train of thought completely there for a moment. Yeah, there's even as Vader, he does have a certain sense of honor compared to the Emperor. So you do have that, and then once again, Vader comes full circle. So I hope that kind of explains the criteria I look for when I'm choosing a character to do a profile of, what I think makes a good and compelling character, and kind of how you can determine if something's well written or not. So that's just my opinion on the matter. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you guys later.